September 2, 1651. In Istanbul, the iftar tables had been cleared. The Tarawih prayers had been performed. The city was slowly falling asleep. But inside Topkapı Palace, no one was sleeping. Deep within the harem, a 62-year-old woman was waiting. Her name was Mapeka Kösem Sultan. She had witnessed the reign of 4 sultans. She had placed 2 of her sons on the throne. Now she ruled as regent for her grandson. For 37 years, she had been the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire. And tonight, she would lose that power forever. In another corner of the palace, another woman was also waiting. She was 24 years old. Her name was Kösem Sultan, Kösem's daughter-in-law, the mother of the young Sultan Mehmed. She was tired of living under her mother-in-law's shadow, and that night she had made a decision that would change her destiny. On one side stood experience, authority, and the support of the Janissaries. On the other side stood youth, ambition, and the loyalty of the palace guards. 2 women, 2 thrones. Only one could survive. And that night, one of the darkest chapters in Ottoman history would be written. The first Valide Sultan ever killed inside the harem. An empress strangled with curtain cords. And questions that would remain unanswered forever. Now, I will tell you the story of that night. Before we continue, if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And let me ask you a question in advance. In the struggle for power, what matters more, age or experience? I'll be waiting for your answer in the comments at the end of the video. Now, let's return to our story. But first, we need to understand how things came to this point. Because to understand what happened that night, we must know who Kösem Sultan was. Kösem Sultan's story began somewhere around 1589. Her birthplace is not known for certain. Some sources say the Greek islands, others say Bosnia. Some even claim she was the daughter of an Orthodox priest. The Italian traveller Pietro della Valle, in a letter written from Istanbul in 1615, said, if I understood correctly, she was the daughter of a Greek priest from a place about 200 miles from Constantinople. It is said that her original name was Anastasia, but even that is not certain. Perhaps it was another name. Perhaps we will never know. What is certain is this: at a very young age, probably 12 or 13, she was brought to the Ottoman palace. She was sent to Istanbul by the governor of Bosnia. Like thousands of girls from Crimea, the Caucasus and the Balkans, she stepped through the palace gates, and there her destiny changed forever. When she arrived at the palace, she was given the name Mapeka. It was a Persian name. Ma meant moon, and Peka meant face, moon-faced. And indeed, she was strikingly beautiful. Her skin was smooth, her eyes bright. Her voice was beautiful. She loved to sing. But what made her special was not only her beauty. It was her intelligence, her cunning, and her ability to influence people. The palace was like a school, and she was its most successful student. At that time, there was a young sultan on the throne, Ahmed V. He was only 14 years old when he ascended the throne. His father had executed Prince Mahmud, and Ahmed grew up with that trauma. He was deeply attached to his mother, Handan Sultan, but she died in 1605. The young sultan fell into a deep emotional void, and Mapeka filled that void. Why did Kösem choose him? The answer was simple. Ahmed was a sickly sultan and would die young, but during that time Kösem had borne him children. When Ahmed died, power passed to his younger brother Mustafa. Normally, when a new sultan ascended the throne, fratricide was considered acceptable to prevent threats to power. But Ahmed, traumatized by his childhood, abolished fratricide and instead imprisoned his brother inside the palace. Mustafa grew up alone in a room, living every night in fear of being executed. He eventually lost his sanity. Decisions were made on behalf of Sultan Mustafa. Kösem did not object. She knew Mustafa could not rule, and she was waiting for her own sons to grow up. Mustafa could serve as a puppet sultan until that time. Thanks to this, Kösem's sons survived. Mustafa's reign lasted only 3 months. He behaved strangely during council meetings. He threw gold coins into the palace pool, did not recognize the viziers. It was obvious to everyone that he was mentally unstable. The state officials and pashas deposed him and placed young Osman on the throne. Young Osman was the son of Kösem Sultan, Kösem's rival. He was only 13 years old, but he was intelligent and ambitious. He wanted reforms. He wanted to break the power of the Janissaries. He wanted to reduce the influence of palace women. This meant danger for Kösem because of her influence over the Janissaries. Kösem was sent to the old palace and removed from Topkapi. She fell from favor, but she waited silently. She preserved her connections. She waited 6 years. In 1622, the Janissaries rebelled. Osman's plans to abolish the Janissary Corps were leaked. The soldiers were furious. They marched to the palace. They dethroned young Osman and killed him brutally. He was strangled in the Seven Towers dungeon after severe torture. Some sources claim his legs were crushed. He became the first Ottoman Sultan killed by the Janissaries. Some historians claim Kösem had a hand in this. There is no proof, but suspicion remains. She had strong ties with the Janissaries, paid them, bought their loyalty, and young Osman's death benefited her. Coincidence? Perhaps. Perhaps not. After the death of young Osman, Deli Mustafa was placed on the throne once again. But he could not endure it. His illness was progressing. He was unable to govern the state. And finally, Kösem's time came. Her first son, Murat, ascended the throne at the age of 11. Kösem Sultan was no longer just a valide sultan. She received the title Naibe-i Saltanat, Regent of the Empire. She became the person who ruled the state on behalf of the young sultan. She was the first woman in Ottoman history to hold this title and became the de facto ruler of the empire. During Murat's reign, Kösem intervened in every area of state affairs. She attended the divan meetings from behind a curtain. She would sit behind the curtain, listen to the meeting and intervene when necessary. She dismissed viziers. She appointed new ones. She paid the Janissaries' salaries. She suppressed rebellions. During this period, the empire was struggling with serious crises. Baghdad had fallen into the hands of the Safavids. In eastern Anatolia, Abaza Mehmed Pasha had rebelled. Cossack pirates had reached as far as the Bosphorus of Istanbul. There was unrest in Crimea. Kösem managed all of these crises. She suppressed the rebellion of Abaza Mehmed Pasha through diplomatic means. She distributed accession bonuses to the Janissaries and prevented uprisings. She managed the treasury and paid salaries. It is said that on one occasion, she scolded a vizier as follows: "Did I make you a vizier so that you could spend your time in vineyards and gardens? Attend to state affairs, and do not let me hear of your entertainments again." This was not the voice of a valide sultan. It was the voice of a ruler. At that time, Kösem's daily income was 3,000 akçe. She was accumulating an enormous fortune. She was purchasing properties. She was acquiring tax farming rights. She was having commercial buildings constructed. Her wealth reached a level that rivaled that of some sultans. But she did not spend this wealth only on herself. The bribes she distributed to the Janissaries, the salaries she paid when the state treasury was insufficient, and the loyalty networks she established. She knew the power of money very well. However, as her son Murat grew older, he wanted to step out of his mother's shadow. When he reached the age of 17, he began to take control of the government himself. He was a harsh sultan, perhaps the harshest in Ottoman history. He imposed an alcohol ban and personally executed those who violated it. He introduced a tobacco ban. Going out at night was forbidden. Coffee houses were closed. Fear dominated Istanbul. The Sultan would roam the streets at night in disguise and would kill violators of the bans on the spot. The executioner never left the Sultan's side, and he no longer listened to his mother. One day, when Kösem interfered in state affairs, Murat angrily confronted her. "Valide, are you going to try to rule me as well?" Kösem recognized the danger. She could not openly struggle against a sultan as harsh as Murat. She withdrew, but she did not give up. Because Kösem had tasted the power of this sultanate, she simply waited. During this period, she turned toward charitable works. She had the Çinili Mosque built in Üsküdar. She established foundations. She helped the poor. Every year, she prepared dowries for hundreds of poor girls and had them married. She paid the debts of those imprisoned because of debt and had them released. She founded a charitable institution called Sadatul Ufesi. 200 poor people received regular assistance from this institution. The people loved her. They called her Koka Valide, the Great Valide. They called her al-Mu'minin, the Mother of the Believers. But she never abandoned politics. She preserved her connections. She maintained her ties with the Janissaries. She knew how to wait. In 1640, her son Murat died. He was only 28 years old. His liver had failed due to excessive alcohol consumption. Ironically, the sultan who had banned alcohol died because of alcohol, and the throne passed to Kösem's last surviving son, Ibrahim. Ibrahim's accession to the throne was a critical moment for the Ottoman dynasty, because Ibrahim was the only remaining male heir of the dynasty. His brothers Suleiman and Kösem had been executed by his brother Murat. If Ibrahim had also died, the Ottoman lineage would have become extinct. For this reason, he had been kept in the cafes for years. He had heard of his brothers being killed one by one. He had thought every moment that the executioner would come for him, and this had deeply affected him. When Murat died and Ibrahim was told to ascend the throne, he did not believe it. "This is a trap," he said. "They want to kill me." He did not open his door. Kösem Sultan came personally. She showed him Murat's corpse. "My son, your brother is dead. You are now the sultan." Only then did Ibrahim open the door. But the marks of the years in the cafes were never erased. Ibrahim was unstable. Some historians refer to him as Ibrahim the Mad. At first he had no interest in women, but the continuation of the dynasty was essential. Kösem Sultan began sending concubines to her son. She tried every method and eventually it worked. Ibrahim had many children, but his behavior gradually went out of control. He squandered the palace treasury. He fell in love with a concubine. He called her Shekapare. He spent fortunes for her. He made strange decisions. He had an obsession with sable fur. He had sable laid throughout the palace. He had viziers executed without reason. And at some point, he also slipped out of Kösem's control. He began to quarrel with his mother. He valued the words of his concubines over his mother's words. At one point, he even expelled Kösem from the palace. Kösem was over 60 years old, but she did not give up the struggle. She used her connections with the Janissaries. She gained the support of the ulama. The Janissaries and state officials revolted. Ibrahim had to be deposed, and Kösem Sultan made one of the most difficult decisions in history. She approved the deposition of her own son. Even worse, a few days later, Ibrahim was strangled to death. The extent of Kösem's involvement in this death is disputed. According to some sources, she opposed it. According to others, she remained silent. But she had the power to prevent it. And she did not. Among the people, she was labelled a child killer, and the throne passed to her 6-year-old grandson, Mehmed. This is where we reached the most critical point of the story, because the 3 years between 1648 and 1651 were the years of Kösem Sultan's final struggle. When Mehmed ascended the throne in 1648, according to Ottoman tradition, the title of Valide Sultan should have passed to his mother, Turhan Sultan. The mother of the Sultan became the Valide Sultan and had authority in state affairs. But Turhan was only 21 years old. She was inexperienced. She did not know palace politics. She was a concubine brought from Russia and Crimea. She had been raised by Kösem Sultan. Kösem had given her to her son Ibrahim as a concubine. Now this young woman wanted to take her mother-in-law's place. Kösem did not consent to this. She refused to withdraw. She invented a new title for herself, Büyük Valide Sultan, Grand Valide Sultan. As the grandmother of the Sultan, she was still the most authoritative woman. She continued to attend divan meetings. She continued to appoint viziers. She continued to control the treasury. Kösem Sultan remained in the shadows. She had the title but no authority. Even her daily allowance was lower than Kösem's. While Kösem received 3,000 akçe per day, Turhan received only 2,000 akçe. Even this was a symbol of the imbalance of power. Turhan withdrew to her chambers. She waited silently. Just as Kösem had done 30 years earlier, she began to weave her own network. She grew close to Süleyman Ağa, who was at the head of the Janissaries and responsible for the internal security of the harem. He was a powerful man. The white eunuchs and the black eunuchs were under his command. He became Turhan's most loyal supporter. The Hasodalılar, the Silahdars, the Zülfikarlı Baltacılar, the palace's internal security forces gradually shifted to Turhan's side. Kösem, on the other hand, trusted the Janissaries. She had cooperated with them for 30 years. She paid their salaries. She had enriched their corps. Her loyal men had gained powerful positions within the Janissary corps. Two women, two different centers of power. On one side, the Janissaries. On the other, the palace officials. And from 1650 onward, the tension between these two forces steadily escalated. Inside the palace, members of the two camps watched each other closely. Kösem's concubines monitored Turhan's chambers. Turhan's men followed Kösem's meetings. Both sides used spies. Small incidents turned into major crises. The dismissal of a eunuch, the exile of a concubine, the appointment of a vizier. Every decision was a display of power. The grand viziers were caught between these two women. Whom would they support? Kösem's experience or Turhan's youth? Viziers who supported Kösem were purged. Turhan's man, Siyavush Pasha, became Grand Vizier. Kösem realized that the ground was slipping from beneath her feet, but she did not give up. She prepared a greater move. The summer of 1651 was difficult for Istanbul. Guild uprisings had broken out. Merchants complained about the burden of taxes and the devaluation of the currency. The streets were in chaos. Shops were closed. The Janissaries were restless. The Cretan campaign was ongoing, and their salaries were delayed. The treasury was empty. The people were hungry. Even during Ramadan, iftar tables were miserable. According to reports, 10,000 people in Istanbul went hungry during those days. In August, a major guild uprising erupted. The Janissaries supported the rebellion, and Kösem Sultan took the side of the Janissaries. But Turhan Sultan made a different move. She turned the rebellion to her own advantage. She took advantage of the chaos. Grand Vizier Ahmet Pasha was dismissed. In his place, Siyavush Pasha, who supported Turhan, was appointed. This was a great victory for Turhan. The Grand Vizier was now her man. The circle around Kösem was tightening. She was losing power with each passing day. Turhan's men were rising within the palace. Kösem's own men were being eliminated. And at this point in history, Kösem Sultan devised a terrible plan, or at least so it was claimed. The historian Mustafa Naima was one of the most important historians of the period. His records are detailed and generally considered reliable. According to Naima, Kösem Sultan planned to depose her grandson Mehmed. According to some sources, she even considered having him killed. In his place, she would enthrone another grandson, Prince Süleyman. Süleyman was the son of Saliha Dilashub Sultan, another concubine of Ibrahim. Dilashub Sultan was a quiet and obedient woman. She was not ambitious like Turhan. Kösem could control her. The plan was multi-layered. First stage, poisoning attempt. 2 bottles of poisoned sherbet were given to Uveys Ağa, the chief confectioner working in the palace kitchen. This sherbet was to be given to the young sultan. If successful, the sultan's death would appear natural. No one would understand that it was murder. But this attempt failed. Prince Mehmed did not drink the sherbet. Or he drank it, but the poison had no effect. Perhaps the dosage was insufficient. Perhaps the sherbet was replaced. The details were unclear. Second stage, armed raid. This time, a more direct path would be taken. On the night of September 2nd, 1651, the 16th day of Ramadan, the Janissaries would raid Topkapi Palace. The plan was as follows. Kösem would have the palace gates left open. The guards had been bribed. At midnight, the Janissaries, who had gathered at the Orta Mosque, would quietly enter the palace. They would march to the harem. They would kill Sultan Mehmed and Turhan Sultan. Prince Suleiman would be placed on the throne, and Kösem Sultan, as the Grand Valide of the new Sultan, would preserve her power forever. But there was a betrayal. One of Kösem's most trusted concubines, Meleki Hatun, leaked the plan to Turhan Sultan, and Turhan launched a counterattack. On the evening of September 2nd, 1651, the 16th day of Ramadan, the sun had set. Iftar had been held. The mosques of Istanbul were filled with Tarawih prayers. The streets were slowly emptying. It looked like an ordinary Ramadan night. But the atmosphere in the palace was tense. Turhan Sultan was evaluating the information she had received from Meleki Hatun. She knew Kösem's plan. She knew that the Janissaries would come that night. She knew the gates would be left open. She summoned Uzun Süleyman Ağa. "Ah," Turhan said, "tonight everything will end. Either us or them." Süleyman Ağa bowed his head. "What is your command, my sultan?" "Surround the palace with your men. Do not let the Janissaries enter." Then Turhan stopped. She took a deep breath. "Neutralize the great Valid." Süleyman Ağa understood. "As you command, my sultan." Toward midnight, the palace guards began to move. By Süleyman Ağa's order, more than 100 Zülüflü baltacıs and Hez Odalı guards armed themselves. The palace gates were closed. The Janissaries were prevented from entering. Then they marched toward Kösem's quarters. Kösem Sultan was waiting in her room. She had planned this night as well. The Janissaries would come. The gates were open. Everything was ready. That night, Turhan Sultan would be eliminated. The most obedient of the grandchildren would ascend the throne, and she would remain powerful forever. But the sounds coming from outside unsettled her. Shouting, running footsteps, the sound of weapons. Had the Janissaries arrived so early? And why were there sounds of weapons? The door guards rushed inside in panic. "My Valide Sultan, there is an attack, but it is not the Janissaries. The Hez Odalı guards and the Baltakshas are coming toward the harem." Kösem's face turned pale white. She understood. The plan had been leaked. Turhan had learned of it and had launched a counterattack. "Protect me," she ordered, but it was too late. Fighting had already begun at the door. Kösem's loyal men were fighting Süleyman Ağa's armed unit, but they were far too few in number. Kösem had to decide. Staying meant death. She had to flee, and the struggle for survival began. Kösem Sultan left her room and plunged into the dark corridors. She knew the depths of the harem like the palm of her hand. She had lived within these walls for more than 30 years. She knew every secret passage, every hidden chamber. The corridors were dark. Only the occasional torchlight made the shadows dance. Behind her were footsteps, screams, the sound of steel. She took refuge in the secret chambers known as the Nihan Hane. She moved from one room to another, trying to escape her pursuers. She was gasping for breath. She was 62 years old. Running was difficult, but her instinct to survive kept pushing her forward. Behind her were gunshots, screams, chaos. Kösem's loyal men were being killed one by one. Door guards, concubines, eunuchs. The harem was turning into a river of blood. According to one account, one of her daughters threw herself in front of the attackers. "I am the Valide," she shouted. She was trying to protect the Valide Sultan, perhaps to distract them. perhaps to buy time for her mother to escape. But one of the footsteps recognized her. "This is not the Valide," he said, and they continued searching. In the end, Kösem hid in a very secret mezzanine cupboard called the Gurfe, a storage cupboard, a compartment embedded into the wall, almost invisible. She had had it built years earlier, to take shelter in moments of danger. She climbed inside the cupboard. She closed the door. She sat in the darkness and held her breath. Outside, footsteps were approaching and retreating. Torchlight filtered through the cracks of the cupboard. Shouts could be heard. "Where is this witch? Search everywhere. We can't find her." Perhaps she would escape. Perhaps she could hide until morning. When morning came, things might change. The Janissaries would arrive. They would learn what had happened. They would rescue her. But fate had written a different script. There was someone who knew the location of the cupboard. Who it was is not known for certain. Perhaps a concubine who had served Kösem for years. Perhaps a eunuch. Perhaps the apprentice of the craftsman who built the cupboard. Or perhaps the very person who helped her hide inside it. Whoever it was, they showed the attackers where Kösem was hiding. Footsteps approached. They stopped directly in front of the cupboard. "Here," someone said. The cupboard door was opened. In the light of the torch, the face of the 62-year-old Valide Sultan appeared. What was in her eyes at that moment? Fear? Anger? Pride? Acceptance? The pages of history did not record it. But one thing is certain. Even in the final moments of her life, Kösem Sultan tried to stand tall. They dragged her outside, and then the horror began. They took her jewelry. They tore the pearls from her neck. As they ripped out the earrings from her ears, they tore her earlobes. While removing her rings, they broke her fingers. Her bracelets, brooches, jeweled belt. Gold, ruby, emerald, pearl, a fortune built over decades, was looted within minutes. With greed, with hunger, with brutality. Then they began to beat her. With sticks, with weapon handles, with fists. The screams of the old woman echoed through the corridors. But no one came to help. Everyone was already living in fear. They dragged her along the floor. They pulled her by her hair, all the way to the Kushane door. The Kushane gate, the door opening to the section of the palace where birds were kept. A dark, desolate place. They left her there. She lay motionless. They thought she was dead. But Kösem was still moving. She was groaning. She was alive. So they returned. One of the Zuluflubaltages was there. His name was Kushtu Mehmet. This is the name recorded in history. The man who killed Kösem Sultan. When he saw that Kösem was still moving, he approached her. He looked around. He saw a curtain. He tore off the cord of the curtain. Or, according to some sources, he used Kösem's own hair. That long, thick hair. The hair that sultans had once admired. He wrapped it around her neck and tightened it. As Kösem Sultan took her final breath, what did she think? The day she arrived at the palace as a young girl. The love of Ahmed. Her sons? This cruel palace game where the loser must always die. We will never know. The only thing we know is this. Kösem Sultan died in the same way, in the same place where her son Ibrahim had been killed 3 years earlier, by strangulation. She became the first Valide Sultan in Ottoman history to be murdered inside the harem. By the time the Janissaries reached the palace at dawn, everything was over. The Janissary Agas, who had gathered at the Orta Mosque, came to the palace gates as planned. They were going to enter. They were going to carry out Kösem Sultan's plan. They were going to eliminate Turhan Sultan and the young Sultan. But the gates were closed. Süleyman Ağa's men were on guard. And then a terrifying piece of news came from inside. Kösem Sultan was dead. The Agas was stunned. The entire logic of the plan collapsed. Without Kösem, they were powerless. They turned back without doing anything. They sent a list to Grand Vizier Siyavush Pasha. A list containing the names of people they wanted handed over to them. The names of Turhan's men. The names of those involved in the assassination under Süleyman Ağa. But it was already too late. All the cards were now in Kösem Sultan's hands. Siyavush Pasha took the Janissaries list. He looked at it and set it aside. Within a few days, most of the Agas loyal to Kösem were executed or exiled. The corps commanders were purged. Kösem's supporters within the Janissary corps were eliminated. At the age of 24, Kösem Sultan became the new ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Kösem Sultan's body was taken to the old palace. She was washed, shrouded, and placed in a coffin. She was buried beside her husband Ahmed, in the courtyard of the Sultan Ahmed Mosque. Who attended the funeral? Was Turhan who ordered her death there? Did the concubines who had served her for years weep? These details were not recorded. But one thing was recorded. The people were saddened. They remembered Kösem's charitable works, the alms she distributed to the poor, the mosques she built, the foundations she established. After her death, she was given many titles. Valide Muazzama, the magnificent Valide. Valide Maktule, the murdered Valide. Valide Shahide, the martyr Valide. The people loved her, but the palace tried to forget her quickly. Now let us take a step back and think about the meaning of this event. Kösem Sultan's death marked the end of an era in Ottoman history. The period known as the Sultanate of Women reached its peak with her and ended with her. Think about it. This woman entered the palace at the age of 13 as a concubine. She witnessed the reigns of 6 sultans, Ahmed, then Mustafa, then young Osman, Murat, Deli Ibrahim, and Mehmet. 2 of them were her sons. 1 was her grandson. She served as regent for 20 years. She was one of only 2 women in Ottoman history to officially hold the title of regent. The other, ironically, was Kösem Sultan, the woman who had her killed. She attended imperial council meetings. She intervened in decisions of war and peace. She appointed and dismissed viziers. She managed the treasury. She kept the Janissaries under control. She accumulated an immense fortune. She accumulated it. Her income amounted to hundreds of thousands of gold coins. Properties, lands, commercial buildings. She had the Büyük Valide Han built. According to a legend, she hid her most valuable jewels deep within the towers of this inn. Perhaps they are still there, waiting to be discovered. But most importantly, she played a role in softening the tradition of fratricide. By keeping her sons in the cage, she ensured their survival. This marked the beginning of a fundamental change in the Ottoman succession system. So did Kösem really plan to kill her grandson, Ivedi Mehmed? This is a question still debated among historians. Historian Mustafa Naima, as a contemporary source, describes this plan in detail. The poisoned sherbet, the gates left open, the Janissary raid. All of these appear in Naima's records. A Polish musician, Wojciech Bobowski, was living in the palace at the time. In his book called Enderun, he recounts Kösem's poisoning attempt. The details match those given by Naima, but other historians are skeptical. Could these claims have been propaganda by Kösem Sultan? Stories fabricated to defame Kösem? What is certain is this. There was a deadly power struggle between Kösem and Turhan, and in that struggle only one could win. Whether Kösem's plan was real or not, Kösem Sultan made the first move, and she won. Perhaps Kösem truly planned her grandson's death. Perhaps she only intended to depose him. Perhaps she planned nothing at all. And all of this was merely rumour spread by Turhan. We will probably never know the truth. History sometimes asks questions, but gives no answers. But the story does not end here, because Kösem Sultan's death led to many changes in the palace. Turhan Sultan assumed the regency. She immediately raised her daily stipend from 2.000 takçe to 3.000 takçe. Around her neck now hung a seal inscribed Valide Gazi Sultan Mehmed Han. Power was now in her hands, but she was not as successful as Kösem. She was inexperienced in state affairs. She had to consult the viziers. She could not rule alone like Kösem. She tried several grand viziers. None of them worked. Finally, an unexpected name emerged. Köprülü Mehmed Pasha. Köprülü was illiterate. He came from the Janissary ranks. He was old, over 70, but he understood state affairs very well, and he restored order ruthlessly. He crushed rebellions. He executed the corrupt. He recovered the treasury. He imposed discipline on the army. The Köprülü era began, one of the last great reform periods in Ottoman history, and it continued until the Vienna disaster of 1683. Some historians argue that Kösem's death played a role in the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The end of strong women's influence in governance may have disrupted the balance. Others argue that Kösem's policies had already weakened the empire. Excessive dependence on the Janissaries, networks of bribery, the sale of offices. These were products of Kösem's era. Who is right? Perhaps both. History rarely allows black and white judgments. Now I want to tell you one more secret. What happened to Kösem Sultan's fortune after her death is not fully known. The jewels on her body were looted at the time of her death. Her ears and fingers were torn apart, but those were only the items she carried on her. The greater part of her true wealth was elsewhere. Do you remember the Büyükvalide Han, a great inn built for merchants? Completed in the mid-17th century, merchants stayed there and stored their goods. It was one of Kösem's largest investments. According to legend, Kösem hid chests filled with jewels deep within one of the towers of this inn. Gold, rubies, emeralds, pearls, the most valuable pieces she had accumulated over the years. These chests were never found. Perhaps it is only a legend, or perhaps it is real. Think about it. A fortune of an empress accumulated over decades. The treasure of one of the richest women in Ottoman history. Where did it all go? According to official records, Kösem's estate, her inheritance, was transferred to the state treasury. 20 chests of gold and countless jewels were taken to Topkapı Palace. But the amount was far less than expected. A fortune accumulated over years could not have amounted to just this. Perhaps Turhan Sultan and her men seized the greater part of it. Perhaps Kösem hid her fortune when she realized she was going to die. Or perhaps someone found it but never told anyone. The Büyükvalide Han still stands today. In the heart of Istanbul, in the Tahtakale district, tourists walk through it. Shops are open, and perhaps somewhere deep within, an undiscovered treasure is still waiting. Maybe it is real, maybe it is a legend, but it is a question worth asking. There is one more secret. After Kösem's murder, Uzun Süleyman Ağa gained great prestige. He became Turhan Sultan's most trusted man. He received great rewards and became one of the most powerful figures in the palace. But Grand Vizier Siyavush Pasha tried to break his influence. A power struggle began between them, and within a few months, Süleyman Ağa fell from favor. He was exiled. He lost everything he owned. Was this Kösem's revenge? Was the spirit of the great Valide haunting them? Or was it simply the natural course of palace intrigues? Perhaps one day, answers will emerge from the hidden pages of history. So who was Kösem Sultan really? To some she was a monster, a woman who allowed her own son's death, who attempted the murder of her grandson, burning with ambition for power, rising through bribery, intrigue and manipulation. To others she was a hero, the woman who kept the Ottoman dynasty alive, who halted fratricide, who touched the lives of thousands through charity, who steered the state through crises. Perhaps both are true, perhaps neither. Human beings are not one-dimensional, and neither was Kösem Sultan. She played the role that history assigned to her. She began as a concubine. She became Haseki. She became Valide Sultan. She became Naibe-i Sultanat, and in the end she became a victim. Her 62-year life spanned one of the most turbulent periods in Ottoman history, and she left her mark on it more deeply than anyone else. The peak and the end of the Sultanate of Women. Mahpeker Kösem Sultan. Let us return one last time to the night of September 2nd. Imagine a 62-year-old woman hiding inside a cupboard, holding her breath. Outside, footsteps, torchlight. shouting, 37 years of power, compressed into this moment of darkness. Perhaps she was reviewing her life at that moment. The day she arrived at the palace at 13, the admiration in the young sultan's eyes, the birth of her children, her sons' coronations, glory, fame, power, and now inside a cupboard, waiting for death. What did she think when the door was opened? Fear? Anger? Acceptance? We will never know. The only thing we know for certain is this. That night in Topkapi Palace, an era ended. A woman died, and history began asking questions that will last forever. Yes, we have reached the end of this story. Kösem Sultan's life is proof of how temporary power truly is, including her life. The woman who ruled the empire for 37 years, lost everything in a single night, but her legacy lives on. The Çinili Mosque in Üsküdar still stands. The Büyük Valide Han still stands in the heart of Istanbul. Her foundations are still active. Her story is still told. And perhaps somewhere in Istanbul, the jewels she hid are still waiting to be discovered. Maybe real, maybe legend, but worth questioning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you turn on notifications, you'll be informed about new videos. Let's discuss this in the comments. Do you think Kösem Sultan was a hero, a monster, or perhaps both? I'm curious about your thoughts. We will continue uncovering the mysterious pages of history together. See you in the next video.